As the final chapter of advanced data structures, we'll look at external memory data structures and algorithms a bit. So I want to give you a bit of an overview about this part. And let's start a bit with what this is about and why we should care. Yeah, first of all, as motivation, it's probably fitting that it's towards the end of today's class. I don't know if you can read this. These are something you can find online as well. It's an illustration how long certain things take in computers. And it goes from 1 nanosecond, which is roughly, well, nowadays, maybe several clock cycles, right? All the way up to how long it takes to send something over the internet. And I always think these kind of representations are hard to grasp. And so I invite you to do the following little journey. We start with one little black box, that's 1 nanosecond, as I said, on the order of individual CPU instructions. Take one such tick. Indeed, reading 1 word of memory from the level 1 cache takes even just half a nanosecond. Incredibly fast. If you cause a branch mispredictions because conditional branch wasn't possible to predict, then it already is a 10-fold slowdown. And if you need to go to the next level of cache, similar a slowdown. And if you use a lock, already 50-fold slowdown. Now, 100 of these little black boxes is one of these blue things. And that's one of these is the cost of one main memory reference. Now, that's on the order, if you combine a whole lot of these, that's what a fast zip program needs to zip some things. If you take 100 of these, you're at this level of sending 1 kilobyte over a gigabit network, right? Which is fast. You'd think a kilobyte is not much. And here we're at the fast SSD read speeds. Now this is a bit, outdated. I think this is a factor 100 faster now, or maybe more with non-volatile memory. This is substantially sped up, but still kind of maybe an order of magnitude or 2 are off. What certainly is not off is read 1 megabyte from main memory. This may not be much faster now. And remember where we came from, individual CPU instructions all the way down there, right? And then it gets even worse. 100 of these, that's a disk seek on a hard disk drive. So if you zoom in and out a few times, I think it's the same picture, right? I stole the same picture, but this is, exponentials are just not easy to grasp. And you can't even see somewhere down here, right? So if you're working on hard disk drives and you do random access, that's what old paging on computers used to do. If you're waiting for 10 of these red things, you can ignore all other computation is for free. This is virtually true, right? There's so many orders of magnitude in between. If you do random, a disk seek means the physical read-write head of the hard disk drive has to move. So if you jump for each bit all over your hard disk, you're going to wait these 10 red blobs. You can do as much computation in between as you want, as long as you're not solving an NP-hard problem in each time. So that's the motivation for this external memory model, which is the theoretical answer to this kind of observation, right? So I don't know, if your daily commute is dominated by the number of transatlantic flights you take, or pick any metaphor that you like. Is a fairly old idea. So motivation is to grasp these kind of latency numbers and turn that into a theoretical model that you can design algorithms for without worrying about, is this a disk seek or SSD? We don't want to know the details of that. So instead, we'll look at this model. Let me try to draw on the side a bit. So we have our main memory. That's the fast main memory. You can also call it cache. I think this is a bit depending what you feel is more appropriate as a name. The idea of the model will be that you can apply it either between main memory and hard disk drive, or you can apply it between CPU cache and main memory. The same kind of game is played in both cases, and it only tweaks the parameters. So there's the CPU here with a fat bandwidth connection to main memory. But this is relatively small, and then there's an virtually infinite external memory. We have as much space as you want. But there's a much thinner connection, and you can only transfer blocks of memory. Now, this is also one block. So in terms of B elements and the number of blocks you can fit into memory is M over B, so that the total memory size is capital M. So this is very fast and will ignore everything on the left side of the picture in terms of the approximation for costs, and only count how many data transfers you have between external memory and your internal memory. And in particular, what's important is there's no way for the CPU to directly access this slow memory. It has to go via the main memory. So we have an internal memory or cache, an external memory, which is unbounded in size. Data has to be transferred in contiguous blocks. The input size will denote by capital N in this chapter. That's somehow the convention, and little n is taken for an abbreviation where you divide n by the block size. So how many blocks does your input occupy is the little n. And similar for capital M, that's the number of elements that fit in internal memory, divided in blocks, so little m blocks in internal memory. Okay. And as I said, if you're comparing this with random seeks on disk, say, it's justified to say that all that counts is the transfers between disk and internal memory. And the cost of an algorithm is only that number of communication. We don't care about any other computation. I should say that's an extreme view. And sometimes this leads to a bit, we could say, unrealistic assumptions. But most of the time, this is indicative that to first order, you design the algorithms for the right thing if you follow this. Now, external memory algorithms, there's a lot known and has been studied from various perspectives. Here, I'm going to focus on the data structures part of it, but we'll briefly talk about some basics like sorting in external memory. We'll briefly cover. This is a table that gives for some simple algorithmic tasks what I/O complexity they have. For example, scanning n elements that are contiguous. That's important here, of course. That are contiguous in external memory. How would I do this? Well, I load the first B of them into my internal memory, then I can read them. And then I can load the next block of B elements into internal memory and read them. So I'm only going to load a block one for one out of B elements. So with n over B, or theta of little n, block IOs, I can read n elements. Remember, we don't pay for the computation. It's only IOs. Sorting elements you can also do, and it turns out it has this slightly awkward complexity. Have you ever seen this before? Okay, good. What's that?
I can't remember. I don't think so.
So I'm sure that the database group would also talk about external memory, but they maybe not from the theoretical side or analyzing things in these parameters. They would probably present in the database courses, they would certainly use some of the data structures, but maybe from a different angle. And so I hope I'm not duplicating things there. Seems not the case. If you write this awkward running time with these abbreviations, it looks a bit less awkward. That's mainly the reason why people like these little n's, just as an abbreviation of capital N divided B, and same for little m, capital M divided B. If you're searching among n keys, I guess this should be in a sorted array. You imagine you have things in sorted order. Note that here sorting is sped up substantially. You can, this log m, maybe I should say something about the parameters. In most cases, B is somewhat moderate, maybe 10 to 100 elements, if you think about a cache line. But this M, the size of the cache, depending on what level, or the size of the main memory, this could be thousands, right? So usually having something involved with M gives you a very substantial speed up. And dividing by B is also good, but is a little less extreme in many cases. I guess it could be even, for main memory, it could be way larger, right? Okay, and the last row is a bit funny. This shows you that this external memory has a few peculiarities. Permuting n elements, so you know, basically it's a sorting without the comparisons. If you already know in what order you want to bring the elements, you're basically still going to pay the same as if you were to sort. Because the physical real location of elements is what costs, or comparisons are for free because it's computation. But also, even if you count them, it's dominated by the sorting cost. And so as the last thing for today, let me show how you can sort in this model in this optimal time. And it turns out the algorithm is fairly straightforward. It's just an external merge sort variant. And the only thing you have to do is do a multi-way merge. And you don't have to be clever about it because we're only counting IOs. So it has two stages. The first stage is I'm going to read a chunk of M elements. I read them in one block at a time, fill my entire memory with M elements, and then sort them internally and writing them back. So I'm assuming I don't need extra space for sorting. So maybe this internal step uses some sort of heap sort or quick sort. But you know, its computation is for free. The only cost this has is to read in the M elements. So one of these steps costs little m IOs. And how many such chunks do I have to read? Well, n divided capital M. And so overall, it's linear in n. I think now it wasn't so smart to write this like this. So you have that many chunks. So it's little n, capital N divided B total IOs for the first stage. Now I have my inputs transformed into runs of M elements each. And now I'm doing a multi-way merge where I read K runs at a time, but I don't read them into memory. I read only one block of each. So I can make up this number of runs that I use. I can fill my entire memory with one block from each run and one output block. And then I can always read from these blocks until they're empty and then replace them. That way I can merge K runs at a time, all of this in the IOs of one scan. So one such merge costs scanning time, so number of elements divided by B IOs. And then you just need to determine how many rounds of such merging you do. And because we reduce the number of runs by this factor k in each round, it's a bottom-up merge sort. We start with n over m runs, and so the number of passes is log to the base k of n over m. Then I'm left with a single run, and then it's sorted. And this k you can insert is m over b. Now here we have n divided m, not n divided b from here or from the table. But if you look at this, this is actually almost the same. It's just dividing here by m or dividing by b inside the log is essentially inconsequential. It's a plus minus 1. And so each pass costs little n IOs. I have that many passes, or otherwise known as that. So multiplying this gives you the sorting complexity. Okay, so a relatively straightforward algorithm. And you can prove that this is also optimal. That's a bit lengthier. It's an information theoretic proof. So basically counting that you cannot, from loading one block, learn too much information. And it shows that this weird complexity is the truth. That's the precise bound for sorting.